With an arsenal of mediocre content, and now negative subscriber growth, and a reputation ruined by both a competitive streaming industry and constant waves of online criticism, Netflix is slowly and ironically turning into the blockbuster of streaming services. The giant with a former monopoly on the entire market is now a struggling contender. How exactly did we get here? How could such a massive company have a fall from grace this steep and this sudden? Maybe the seeds were already there. Maybe the signs were clear as day, but for one reason or another, executives were clouded by spiking subscriber growth and a satisfied corporate hierarchy. Netflix wasn't always met with the level of skepticism we see today. They were once a powerhouse for content, having thousands of selections to choose from. The problem is, deals in this industry were temporary and would often sour. In 2013, MGM and Universal would pull 1,800 films and television shows off of the platform, causing an immense amount of internal panic. This sparked an urgency for new content. In response, Netflix would dramatically increase their spending on Netflix originals, sparking a wave of television shows, some incredibly successful and others fading after only a brief season or two. The problem was, their most successful listed series were still owned by other companies. Friends was owned by Warner Brothers and The Office was owned by NBC. They were hardly the type of people you could strong-arm into negotiating. These two shows dominated the viewership, accounting for nearly 11% of the platform's total traffic. They would go on to lose both around the start of 2020, and attempts to regain the streaming rights would prove hopeless. Netflix's solution was to double down on the content machine, churning out film after film, show after show. They've had a number of successful series. Cult classics such as Stranger Things and Squid Game have enjoyed long, comfortable stays atop the ratings charts. Buzz for these would almost fizzle out immediately after the season aired. Netflix had adopted what we would call a binge model, essentially a season that is released all at once to incentivize long-form viewership and to reward the subscriber. This initially aided their growth, given that most television shows had a weekly release model. Viewers hated the idea of waiting until the weekend for their next piece of content. They wanted the gratification of getting it in bulk. The problem was, with an increase of social media adoption came a decrease of attention span. The gratification of a new series was dismissed as soon as the next best thing came along. There was no longer incentive to continue discussing a show when your friends and coworkers were already on to the next binge, the next big thing. Streaming services like HBO had taken advantage of this insight, opting for the weekly model when it came to massive social media favorites like Game of Thrones or Euphoria. A season would begin and discussions would last until the following week when a new episode would air. This resulted in a stronger relevancy, a more constant influx of attention. Euphoria and Game of Thrones would trend weekly on platforms like Twitter and Instagram, and memes would dominate social media for months on end. And the next season, it would happen all over again. Netflix didn't have this luxury. They essentially pigeonholed themselves into this routine of release and forget. Viewers grew accustomed to the instant gratification. Once a binge was complete, the steam from the release would fade and the viewers would be left wanting something more. Netflix has an incredibly large selection of content. The scale of films and series Netflix puts out has been nothing short of extraordinary. The problem is, when you cast such a massively wide net, it becomes nearly impossible to fund all of it. Netflix can no longer support the hundreds of projects they initially started to combat the decrease in attention span. Shows like American Vandal and The Get Down had developed a very strong following both on social media and the platform alike. Fans were shocked to find out that they would inevitably be cancelled, along with a number of other Netflix originals. It's no secret that fans prefer to start a series with the intention of finishing it. At some point, they want a resolution, or at least the promise of one. Netflix has what is essentially a cemetery of shows that could have been. This helped to sour the public perception of the company, and viewers no longer saw them as this powerhouse of content creation, but rather a corporation in desperate pursuit of regaining cultural relevancy. It was no longer about the art or storytelling. It seemed like they'd turned into nothing more than a content machine. This skill in content creation would hinder quality almost across the board. They still had shows like Stranger Things and Ozark, sure, but in between seasons, there was a lapse of content to fill the void. This may have been okay a decade ago, but there's competition now, other places the viewers can turn to. If you aren't an active Netflix user and haven't been in the trenches with everyone else these last few years, you're probably thinking, well, the content couldn't have been that bad. And I understand the concern, but please believe me when I tell you that they were actually that bad. Most Netflix film originals are filled with cheesy one-liners or quirky forced badassery that not only don't really fit the vibe of whatever genre they're attempting, but everything just feels so over the top. There's also this habit of stuffing these originals with the most famous actors in the industry in hopes that the star power is enough to deflect from the cringe-inducing dialogue.
I'm about to send you to the worst place in the world.
Your Instagram account?
I'm a fan of Ryan Reynolds, he seems like a cool guy, but we don't have to see him in every single movie. I don't know how many more attempts at Ocean's 11-esque spy comedy or bizarre art house dramas I can take before I give up on the service entirely. And then there's the remakes. Netflix has a history of taking beloved animated classics and turning them into disastrous live-action remakes. Cowboy Bebop and Death Note are just two of the most recent notable slip-ups. These projects are written as if the only access to the source material the writers had was through hearing about it. There are a number of other live-action remakes in the works, such as Avatar: The Last Airbender, One Piece, and Full Metal Alchemist, and if history is any indication, we are in for some pretty serious letdowns. Very rarely do live-action remakes ever work. Most of the time it's done simply as fan service that, to my knowledge, nobody asked for. Compare this with other platforms like Amazon, where instead of butchering a beloved classic, they onboard creatives to make their own spins on an already popular genre. Amazon has the funding to both scale their quality and their quantity, whereas Netflix only seems to be doing one of the two. We don't need another Kissing Booth movie, a cheesy horror flick, or an absurdly high-budget political comedy. I would love to see more clunky and original indie films without the crazy budgets or awful CGI. The Duplass brothers do it all the time and they consistently make magic. Maybe try allocating more of a budget to shows that very clearly show potential and social media buzz but just need another season or so to gather steam. Start monitoring social trends, find out what content people gravitate towards, and for the love of God, don't try to force it. There shouldn't be this graveyard of content people have to comb through to get to the good stuff. Now maybe I'm being too harsh. After all, Netflix does have its positives, things that they're very strong and consistent at. I cannot stress this enough. Whoever is in charge of selecting the documentaries at Netflix desperately needs a raise. I can't even begin to count how many limited series or 90-minute long true crime pieces I've seen on this platform. It's not even just that. From athletics to social commentaries, there's a massive selection, and for the most part, they're all pretty good. The issue is, it's not enough to carry a platform, especially one this massive. There are thousands of hungry writers ready to bring us the next House of Cards or Peaky Blinders. Thousands of directors eager to be the next Jordan Peele or Greta Gerwig. I'm happy they're taking chances, but at the percentage they're batting, this doesn't seem sustainable. Now, by no means do I think Netflix is doomed. It's almost too big to fail at the moment, with a strong 220 million subscribers. But given how good the competition is and the quality of content by competitors like HBO and Amazon, they should strongly consider changing course. I understand it's a business and I don't have the insight into the inner workings or analytics, but I think we can all agree that whatever Netflix thinks it's doing clearly isn't working.